Paradise Island Limited and PDI Paradise Limited have come together with the government to build something extraordinary. A $165 million development which will pay homage to Paradise Island's legacy while propelling it toward an ever more vibrant future. This investment represents the continued confidence that investors have in our tourism product and economy. Last year, as you referred, we broke the record for arrivals with over 9 million visitors to our shores. And this year, we have already seen several record-breaking months.
For helping steer this project through all of the ups, downs, and here and there to finally get to a really beautiful place in terms of having a wonderful project that's going to be a crown jewel in Nassau and a real win-win for the Bahamas and for the tourism industry. So congratulations and thank you.
As foreshadowed in our Blueprint for Change, the government through the National Investment Fund will hold equity, ensuring that 49% of this endeavor is owned by Bahamians.
We will forge ahead, determined and optimistic toward a dazzling future for tourism in the Bahamas. And the Royal Beach Club is an important part of our plans. Thank you.
And Cabinet.
Every day, we are working to build a more inclusive economy and a stronger, safer country.
Hear all of the latest developments as the Davis administration carries out the broad mandate of progress and change. Our live weekly press briefings provide full access to current newsmakers on the most topical issues of the day. We facilitate prompt responses from cabinet ministers on the latest reports and get answers on the issues that matter to you.
Will any penalties be levied against the
OPM Press Now, keeping you in the know. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Office of the Prime Minister's weekly press briefing. It's good to see all of you, as usual, especially Jade, who's celebrating a birthday today. Happy birthday, Jade. All right, so you got your shout out this morning. Well, this morning we're happy to be joined by the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Wayne Munro. As you know, the new trial by judge alone bill was passed in the House of Assembly yesterday, and that is intended to expedite the rate at which cases are tried and heard in the Supreme Courts. The minister will shed more light on what the implications of this new legislation are. We're also happy to be joined today by the Director of Investments, Ms. Felicia Hanna. We will hear from her on some of the new initiatives to sort of consolidate efforts to carry investments over the finish line.
Thank you. The role as leader of government business in the House, that I address an issue that I saw making the headlines in the press, and that is how we treat with question time. Let me begin by giving the perspective. My information, which as far as I know is reliable, is that in the last administration, they didn't treat with question time because they simply didn't schedule a sitting of the House on the second Wednesday of the month. You will see that in this administration, we schedule sittings of the House for the second Wednesday of the month, and we answer questions. The issue that arises over time is that the questions themselves require input from technical persons. So for instance, I'll give you an example of one of my questions. I've been asked to basically disclose what the security arrangement is for our borders. And so as you may imagine, the technocrats can produce a full document that sets it all out. Some of it will relate to sensitive material from our partners, and you would have to get clearance from them to disclose it. Some of it you wouldn't disclose for tactical reasons and national security reasons, and you'd have to take an assessment over that. And so the technical folks will have to do their work and produce a product for me. That's the case across all of the questions for all of the ministers. Now, yesterday there were questions to the Prime Minister. They basically were tabled in February of this year. They require involvement from the staff of the Ministry of Finance, the leader of the opposition, who has been in government previously, would know what time of year this is. This is preparation for the budget. And so he would have been well aware when he tabled the questions that the folk in the Ministry of Finance would be engaged in the budget preparation. And so he's well aware that at this time, the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance are engaged with meetings with other ministers, because by the 29th of this month, we have to table the budget communication, basically campaigning to keep an office come the 1st of June. It's no more, no less. As after the 1st of June, that is to draw that out to you. Perhaps we need to be more express when we're making these points, but you will remember that his question to Jobette Colby Davis was, are we going to disclose whether we are going to have covered extensively the issue of the RFP over production of energy? So yet another cynical exercise focused on doing what is necessary. This time, to the knowledge of anyone who has been in government, is a very kinetic time for ministers. Not only do you have to be focused on the activities in your ministry to drive them forward, but you're now into is rowing for money. And so ministers are engaged with jockeying, and the Prime Minister's Minister of Finance and these technocrats are involved with balancing these issues that have to do with how priority matters are addressed. And so the Bahamian people should be playing to the cameras. He admitted it. He admitted it if you check what he said. He said, this isn't about answering the question. We will get through the budget preparation exercise. On the 29th of May will be the presentation of the budget communication, which will be followed in June. We would again urge journalists to seek contact. Please inquire. You can be directed to what is happening. And having been directed to what is happening, you can then raise these issues with persons like Michael Pintard. Do you not know that this is budget preparation time? Do you not know that your question requires input from the Ministry of Finance technocrats? Do you not know from your experience what they're engaged in at this time? It is a tough job to be a journalist. We appreciate that. Any help that we can give in terms of response, certainly I think everyone will know. For my part, I'm always open to assist, because that is a part of the job. That being out of the way in my capacity as leader of government business in the House, let's turn now to the two bills that were passed yesterday. They were bills, firstly, that were passed that the judiciary were requesting. The Chief Justice, in his opening of the legal year, and again in the Eugene Depute Distinguished Lecture, indicated that they would wish to make some steps as we look at the whole system, that we would not wait to the very end. Something similar, perfection is the enemy of progress. That is to say, rather than sit down in big conclaves and conferences that is effective and efficient, you deliver it. Otherwise, that is a recipe for doing nothing. That were passed yesterday are significant the first bill, the Supreme Court Amendment Bill of it. In 1998 and 1999, then Chief Justice Dame Joan Sawyer appointed a task force on delay reduction. We examined the Supreme Court process and the Magistrates Court process. It was seen before this new century, and it pointed to the need to consider judge-alone trials, evidentiary hearings. So what the Supreme Court bill does is give the court, certainly be pushing to come forward, and I expect it to come forward, give the courts. You would have all reported on a case is excluded. There being no other evidence, the accused is directed to where if the fact of the admissibility of the confession and over again. And so when you can determine these matters that can bring a case to an end up front, you save the time that you would have been in trial up to the point of determining that. And it's often, as trials today run, matters of weeks. In the same way, if there's DNA evidence, fingerprint evidence, confession evidence, which if it is admitted, will make it a very difficult case for the accused. Competent lawyers, if the evidence is admitted, will advise the accused to seek a plea agreement. I would advise the public that in any system that hopes to try the matters before it, the minority of cases go to trial. So in the US federal court system, 90% of cases are disposed of by plea agreements. 10% go to trial. 8% result in convictions. 2% result in acquittals. Because you have an 80% conviction rate, people are more likely to enter plea agreement when they see the strength of the evidence. If one looks at the cases that come before our Supreme Court, and Sir Burton, Dame Joan, now Sir Ian, take us through all of it. You could never try all of the cases that are brought before our courts. And so it will be important that we have increased plea agreements. The ability to have evidentiary hearings at the beginning. The trial by judge alone simply adds the ability for somebody in the Supreme Court jury. You can elect to be tried by the magistrate, and by far, most people do elect to be tried by the magistrate. This simply allows the same thing to happen in the Supreme Court with safeguards. There were issues around those that the uptake on trial by judge alone is growing month to month, year to year. And it's a very simple thing, you know. We know Bahamian people who, if you come to court, they say you must do something or the police wouldn't bring you here. We have a lot of people who think that. Well, if you're an accused person, you can either run the risk of having jurors with that mindset, who when they convict you, don't have to say why they convict you, or have trial before a judge, who if he or she convicts you, has to give a written judgment explaining why the only material that the Court of Appeal has to consider is the direction of the judge. They have no material to consider why the jury did what it did, and having done a number of criminal appeals. Well, if you have trial by judge alone, the judge will have to say why they found you guilty. In jurisdictions that allow it, in particular New South Wales, we feel that Chief Justice Winder is correct, and these two pieces of legislation, that is why we advanced them. We point out that this having been on the cards and successive Chief Justices having spoken to it, we are an administration who does not let perfection be the enemy of the good. And so that is what I would say about the cynical question asking and playing to the public with it, and about the Supreme Court bill and the trial by judge alone bill. I'll take questions at this point.
Oh, okay. So, hello.
Hello, happy birthday, Jed.
Okay. So, in terms of the trial alone bill, I know in the House of Assembly yesterday, Agent Gibson would have mentioned some of the risk factors that can come by having just one judge proceeding over a case, in terms of biasness and not having a support for that judge to discuss their, I guess, verdict before it's made final. So I don't know if the government took in those factors of biasness or ineffectiveness.
Well, firstly, as I said in the House, a lot of what fell from the other side is disrespectful and inappropriate to be said in Parliament. To talk about bias is to suggest that a judge will not be true to his judicial oath. Judges swear to do right by all men without fear or favor. Judges, if they have an issue of bias that they know, move immediately. You would see the exercise in the Kirk Cornish case, where judges are asked those questions of jurors, and depending on what jurors say, then they excuse them. In that case, where the juror did not disclose a close relationship to the leader of the opposition, in a case that involved a sitting PLP MP, who the women's branch of the FNM had gone on record as making a statement, the judge found that in those circumstances, there was a risk or perception of bias, because that's the test, whether there would be a perception of bias, a reasonable perception, and she discharged the jury. That is the exercise that judges go through when cases come before them. I can understand Mr. Gibson's perspective being a defendant before the court, but as a lawyer, he should know he ought not to be suggesting that judges don't live up to their judicial oath. It's disrespectful, it's not appropriate, and he really owes the entire judiciary, the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, and Privy Council an apology. Now, as to whether you should have more than one judge sitting, very few places that have trial by judge alone, judges sit in panels. It's a simple trial process. In the case in the Turks and Caicos involving the former Premier Michael Mizik and members from his government, a single judge sat. In New South Wales, a single judge sits. In terms of judges having support, I acted as a judge of the Supreme Court. That statement shows a disrespect for the ability of judges. To be a judge of the Supreme Court, you have to have at least 10 years practice. There's then a process by which you are selected. Taking the law and directions, I can have regard to a bench book. At that time, it was the Crown Court's bench book. I understand that we now have our own bench book. These are the directions of law. And then if you are the judge alone, you would then have to say criminal case in which you are at risk of being convicted, what that may do to someone's perceptions. Because make no mistake, your personal circumstances affect your perception of things. Like, you're very happy because it's, any other questions?
Yes, if you can shift gears a bit, talk in your capacity as Minister of National Security, there's concern that recent verdicts may survey.
Well, the Commissioner of Police himself, the police would have advised that they formed a view about the status of the young man who was murdered. Subsequently, you've seen a lot of this video circulating on social media with him saying certain things. The reason that we passed the anti-gang bill to improve on the anti-gang provisions that the previous Christy Davis administration had put in place was to address this pernicious issue of gangs in this country. You have young men running around who have no regard for life at all, not even their own. In that instance, the briefing that I received disclosed that the police recovered 62 fired casings from four different types of ammunition, 2 of which would have come from the equivalent of an assault weapon and a handheld equivalent. And so these are people with no compunction about their lives or the lives of others. The police clearly are of the view that if you have a conflict involving gangs, tit for tat is possible. The police, in response, have stepped up their patrols. They are doing other things that it would not be appropriate to disclose. But bearing in mind what is involved, they are responding in the way that their training drives them to respond. As Minister of National Security, I would take this opportunity to say to the general public, this is why the Prime Minister, in moving the anti-gang bill, pointed out quite clearly, the public has determined that enough is enough with this foolishness. The public has asked for it to be addressed. It's to be addressed through the anti-gang bill. The purpose of that legislation is basically to isolate gang members. And it seeks to do so by imposing penalties, harsh penalties, under the pillar called punishment in this crime strategy, imposing harsh penalties on those who enable these people. When you have these guns, you know what your children are doing. Contrary to what the opposition is saying, we're punishing people who, we intend to punish people who knowingly enable this behavior. So when you see your children with guns and you give them shelter knowing that the police are looking for them, when you empower them by giving them your car to go and do nonsense, you will be held accountable. If people are to do what is right, these gangs will be isolated. Their ability to do what they do and remain undercover will be greatly affected, and the problem will be addressed. We want the public to act before it reaches to their doorstep, because we've seen a number of instances where persons have knowingly done things that resulted being injured or killed. Enough is enough with that, and the public and all of society fight, and we must all play our parts.
Two more questions, Minister. There was a police involved shooting last night. I don't know if you have any more details you could add to that. Secondly, well, to the second part, what are your thoughts on that, right? Given that there's been a number of, I think in a previous interview with you, you did say that based on those adverse rulings, that could sort of affect police's ability to act in instances when they, in your words, should act.
The police involved shooting last night. The commissioner, if the police collect the evidence, the casings, recover the bullets, and do the necessary testing. But certainly, on the report, would have accounted for why an armed young man fired on the police, and the police returned fire. It is important that people understand that if, as a police officer, I report to duty, and I have in the back of my mind, what happens should I shoot and kill? And that 1 second slower could make the difference. And so the officer last night was shot in the exchange. And so we have to pay attention to that. I keep hearing about adverse findings from the coroner's court. I've read the Coroner's Act. I don't understand how, in the statutory context of the Coroner's Act, there can actually be these findings. But I'm not the Attorney General, eh? I used to appear in coroner's matters before I took this chair, representing family of deceased and representing the police. Us having changed our Coroner's Act to align with the act that's in the UK, I have difficulties understanding the verdicts. But as I say, I'm not the Attorney General. I'm not the Director of Public Prosecutions. What I do know is that when I practiced, I represented policemen who I assessed was involved in duty-related shootings for free. And I explained to them that I did that as a private citizen because I depended on them to stand on the line for me. And the man that I have standing on the line for me, I don't want him to be thinking about, does he have legal fees if something happens and he has to go to court? Because if he has those concerns, he might react in a certain way. When the call goes out from control room, he may conveniently not proceed with all speed to the point of conflict. And it may sound in a particular way, but that is what we call on police officers to do. We expect that when we say there's somebody with a gun in your neighborhood, that the police will come to address it. And the fact of the matter is that they are supposed to be judged by the facts as they see them to be. And so when I was in practice again, there was an instance of a young man, a chef, who was on Farrington Road in a white car that matched the description of a car that was said to have been involved in an armed robbery. The police responded, mistook a spatula or something for a gun, opened fire on the car, injured the man. The state had to pay because he fit the description of somebody who was said to have been armed and to pull a gun on somebody. I have said to the officer in charge of the armory that they have a program, a simulation, and you have to determine if the threat warrants the use of lethal harm. I have invited them to invite you, the press, to go through that simulation so that you can understand the decisions that officers have to take in a split second. They do not have the luxury of Monday morning quarterbacking. Their judgment is, am I faced with lethal force? Do I have to respond with lethal force? And they have to do that in an instant. And so that is what concerns me with some of what I hear. And it is not just now that I'm in this chair, but it was before I was in this chair. And that is what drove me to represent officers who I did for free. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Monroe. Well, as you know, the Davis administration has amassed quite a considerable portfolio of investments since coming to office. What is being done now as the country continues to facilitate and consolidate or track those new investments is the consolidation of all of the efforts and agencies that go into carrying those investments across the finish line. We're joined this morning by the Director of Investments, Ms. Felicia Hanna, who will tell us what is being done in that regard. Ms. Hanna?
Thank you and good morning. I'll be brief. When I stood here last, I would have given an update on BIA's effort to digitize the department for better flow in the facilitation component of BIA. The administration has made a commitment in its blueprint for change to revamping the Bahamas Investment Authority. Work is underway on fulfilling that commitment, in particular with reorganizing the Bahamas Investment Authority for the flow of investments through our country a little more efficiently. With that process, we have created three pillars of BIA, which includes the promotion sector, facilitation, and aftercare. In operating on that premise, we had a meeting at police headquarters on the 29th of April, which brought together all technical heads of government agencies in one room to have an open discussion about the policies, the procedures, what improvements need to take place based on the matrix that I would have provided to all heads by the World Bank Ease of Doing Business indicators. Although that report has been discontinued as of September of 2021, the matrix of what needs to be done by governments to create better flow of inward investments is still important. The nature of that meeting was, well, first of all, the meeting was very productive. Technical heads were very excited about the joint venture on improving how we process applications internally, what our investment promotion strategy should be moving forward was discussed. There will be additional discussions, but we have, for the most part, a recommendation to make to policymakers on the investment promotion strategies, as well as the target sectors for investment by island. So that's the promotion part of it. In terms of facilitation, the nature of the discussion was understanding that there are significant time delays that come with the processing of investment applications across agencies. So there was a fruitful discussion about how we improve the internal processes. Coming out of that meeting, there was an agreed position to make a recommendation to policymakers for the implementation of a project development committee. So right now, just so you have an understanding, a brief understanding of the internal processes that take place, a foreign investment application comes to the Bahamas Investment Authority. The Bahamas Investment Authority seeks the commentary of all of the requisite government agencies that need to have input on that application before advancing that application to the National Economic Council. When you're dealing with multiple government agencies, obviously there will be some turnaround times and significant turnaround times due to the constraints that each of us suffer. And so as a result of that, and to mitigate the time delays, that project development committee that will be comprised of all of the requisite agencies will come together, and there will be will review investment applications, and there will be a recommendation made by that one body to the National Economic Council, which will significantly cut down the turnaround time, as well as make sure that the each files across all of the government sectors reflect the same information. So it's an information sharing exercise, as well as cutting down the time frame for government agency turnaround times. There's also a policy component to that as well. That policy component is just understanding a little more of the internal processes by each agency, so that when we advise, from BIA's standpoint, when we advise investors, we're able to give them some realistic overview of what the turnaround times, as well as what the process looks like for other government agencies. As it relates to the improvements that we're trying to make, the implementation of the aftercare unit is important. The aftercare unit is really holding business persons in the Bahamas' hand after they get their approvals, following up to make sure that commitments are met when we confirm or we execute heads of agreements, making sure that we have, if there are any impediments to the investment, that we're able to address those impediments, really opening the line of communication. We also can explore opportunities for reinvestments at that time. At present, the statistics show that about 60% of the investments in our country is from reinvestments. So making sure that we continue on that trend. What we have seen is that there's been a consistent flow in the area of tourism-related investments. And so although we want to continue with that, we want to also improve on other areas of investment. Having this efficient process is key to that. So we want to improve investment statistics and increase the inward flow of investments in the areas of manufacturing and agriculture in particular. And having investment packages for investors is very important for that. In the promotion sector as well, this is probably the most traction that the country has gotten in recent time as it relates to promotion. We have been aggressive with our promotion strategy. We have increased the visibility of the Bahamas globally as it relates to investment promotion. We have renewed our membership to the Caribbean Association of Investment Promotion Agency. In most instances, when investors are looking to invest in the Caribbean Investment Promotion Association of Investment Promotions Agency is the first point of contact. And so making sure that membership is important to making sure that we respond to those and we're able to market and put the Bahamas first out the gate for any questions.
What's the total dollar value of investments currently?
You should listen out for the budget contribution. The minister responsible will be giving you all of that data. Commitment is that the technical heads will appoint a point of contact for each government agency, and first going thereafter we'll make an assessment. The heads of the technical agencies, the agreement is that we will meet quarterly and we'll have in hand the report agencies to understand what they are so that we're able to prepare internally for whatever changes are to be implemented.
Yes, you said last time in October, I think it was last year, that
yes.
You were in consultations with the financial services industry. That was supposed to be completed by the first quarter of this year. How is this completed?
So the memorandum of understanding is with the minister responsible. There are one or two parties that we're in consultation to add to that memorandum of understanding, but that was a part of the meeting, the discussion as well. And so based on that, the first meeting of the Project Development Committee, that is one of the agenda items to discuss because there were some items that needed to be reported back to that body before we can confirm the final document. So look out for a signing for that, hopefully very, very soon.
Very soon? Next week?
Not next week. The committee has to meet first.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You also said there was supposed to be some sectors for Bahamians only that was supposed to be open up for Bahamians only as well.
Right. Of course, that requires some analysis, right? So the National Investment Policy has a list of sectors that are currently reserved for Bahamians. Investment applications are processed based on that current list. What we are doing is looking at the concessions that are currently being granted to developers under the Hotels Encouragement Act, the City of Nassau Revitalization Act, and other, the Agricultural Manufacturers Act and other acts that provide for concessions, and seeing where we can close the gap, where there are, especially in the supply sector, we're trying to assess what is the local capacity in order to revamp and revise that list that is currently in the policy. But that's just one item for update.
One item for update. Okay, last question. Bahamas Invest, where are we with that?
So I have made a recommendation to the minister responsible for Bahamas Invest, which is the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister. I've given him my technical advice, and that's currently under review with him for a policy determination.
update on the status of certain projects, especially like the GIN in Grand Bahama. So can you give us an update on that and where that's going?
So again, in Grand Bahama, there are active discussions about that. The Bahamas Investment Authority is reviewing the files from the GIN with the Office of the Attorney General with a view of coming together for a shelf-ready project for the GIN property. The property is very large, and so, of course, there are a number of considerations based on the size of the property, whether it will be split, what target sector should we be looking at, given the components of the project. You know, that project is very unique, one, because of its location, and two, because it has a marina as well as an airport, and understanding across agencies as well, what are we able to offer for that based on all of the interagency policies, what are we able to offer in terms of a shelf-ready project? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hannah. It was very helpful. You had another question?
No, I thought it was Woods, but it's Hannah, isn't it?
You can call me or exposed.
Thank you, ma'am.
What's happening, right?
Yes, Ms. Hannah.
All right. All right, are there any further questions?
Yes, Ms. Adley, I've gotten 2 separate reports about illegal dredging on some of the outer keys around the province, Athol Island and Rose Island. Do you know anything about this dredging? Because I spoke to Bern Wright as well, the port controller, and he said that he's aware of, well, he isn't aware of the one on Rose Island, but he would look into it. He went through this whole rigmarole saying he was calling all his deputies to see what's going on Rose Island. Now, I also understand that this project on Rose Island in particular is being run by Herman Krasler, and Bern Wright affectionately calls him Herman the German. And apparently he's in business with the Prime Minister's son, Fillmore Davis. So I want to know if there's any kind of, if you guys are actually monitoring these outer islands, and is the Port Department actually monitoring these outer islands for dredging?
Unfortunately, I don't have details on those reports. I can find out for you and get back to you on that, but unfortunately at this point I don't have details on those, no. Anyone else?
Yes, the Grand Bahama Port Authority is pledging to hold a live event. Its goal is to, quote, set the record straight. This is following Prime Minister Philip Davis's address or speech to the Grand Bahama Chamber of Commerce. How far are we along in this process, and is this any concern for the government as they promise to, quote, tell all?
Well, as you know, the Prime Minister addressed the issue this week. He spoke to stakeholders in Grand Bahama, specifically members of the business community, sort of laying out the chronology of things. As you know, this is a matter that we expect to go to arbitration or some sort of analysis that will come to a determination as to what the next steps will be. Outside of that, I won't comment further other than to say that this is an ongoing issue. We will hear more about what the next steps are in the coming days.
And also a well-known blog site that's known for its advocacy for animals is accusing a tourist destination of abandoning starving these dolphins during the COVID-19 pandemic. It hasn't been reopened. Has government heard about this, and is there any concern considering that marine tourism is so vital for our economy?
Well, I can't confirm the veracity of those reports. I prefer not to comment on that before a full investigation. All right. Thank you very much. Everyone have a good afternoon.